A lot of the presentation is focused on Donald Trump and the United States, but I think it can be generalized to all of our countries. I see by the names of the participants here that people are from very different places. So hopefully, hopefully the presentation will be interesting. And I wanted to say something more I forgot. So let's move on. Oh, the presentation is very basic, I wanted to say, but hopefully I'll say something that you didn't know or didn't appreciate. So who we are, our institute is a Czech institute. As in this form, it has now existed for 5 years. But in 2020, the original liberal think tank here in the Czech Republic was or went defunct. So we are continuing in the tradition of this very old think tank. We organize conferences, speeches. This speech that you might see is by Brian Kaplan in Prague. I think it was in 2022. We organize summer schools, and we also have a humanitarian mission to Ukraine. I can tell you more about that at the end of the presentation if you're interested. We focus mainly on individual liberty, free markets, limited government, and peace. I copied that from the Cato Institute. I really liked those 4 things as the headlines. So the basic story of the world is that the world was very poor for the majority of the time. But then around the 16th century, the world started getting richer, as we can see in the data on the gross domestic product. The gross domestic product, very simply put, is if we calculate everything that everybody in a geographical area, mostly we do it for separate countries. If we calculate what everybody and all the companies earned in a year, that gives us the gross domestic product. Or we can calculate it by the value of what they produced, what they created. That's why it's the product. Or there are other methods to calculate it, but this is, I think, the most easiest way to comprehend what it's about. I once presented this chart to a physicist, and he told me that I was dumb, that I've never seen an exponential graph. So I also have a logarithmic chart with this, where it shows the same story. The world was very poor for centuries and millennia, but then got very rich in the last couple of 100 years. With that goes increased globalization. That means the very distant geographical places on Earth trade with each other. Of course, from this chart, you cannot very easily say whether the trade is what causes the wealth, or if the wealth causes the trade to increase. Maybe, hopefully, we'll resolve this question by the end of this presentation. These are some statistics that I found on the World Trade Organization's website. The predecessor to the World Trade Organization was called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which was founded in the 1950s. And they say that in this time from 1950 to 2024, the volume of what the countries trade with each other increased 45 times. That's how much it weighs, what the trade is. And what it costs, they say, increased 382 times. They also pat themselves on the back, saying that the WTO, the World Trade Organization, was founded in 1995, and that since then the trade, the international trade really got off. But I'm not sure that's really the cause of the increased international trade, but maybe it is. They're saying also that international trade grows about 4% on average. Oh yeah, if you have any questions, if I'm saying something wrong, you can message the chat and I'll try to see that, answer that, or correct myself. Right. So international trade grows 4% a year. That's actually pretty good. I thought I would say something about the history of international trade. International, one of the first things that people found interesting to trade across long distances, of course, back then the countries as we now know them didn't exist, but we can have some idea of the geographical regions. So one of the first things that was traded in what would we today say internationally was wine from Georgia. I understand that they stored the wine in very large pots in underground, but to trade the wine, they had to devise some new vessel in which to carry that. And these were called, I think the English word is pronounced amphorae or amphoras, large pottery vases with handles at the top, with a neck, and they were lined with wax. This is how wine was traded and transported many centuries ago. Next item that was traded a very long time ago was amber. That was happening around 3,000 years before Christ. There was a trade between the Baltic states in Northern Europe to Southern Europe, where they had amber in Northern Europe, but they wanted amber, the people in Italy or in the south of Europe, along the Mediterranean and Adriatic coasts. And the demand for these amber stones was so big that we have documented forgeries as early as 2,000 years before Christ. The very big items that were traded historically were spices and silk. Spice trade is the blue line here, and silk trade is, of course, the Silk Road in red. That was around 1,000 years before Christ. And the Silk Road is, of course, very famous because it was the first truly global trade route, even though you can see on the map it was not really global, but it was across a long distance. But then it got superseded by ships. So, but it lasted 17 centuries, if I'm calculating that correctly, from 200 before Christ to 1500 Anno Domini. That's 17 centuries, I think. Then we had glass, paper, salt, and gold. Interestingly, also, as with amber in Europe, we had trade in Africa, where the more northern parts of North Africa, or the northern part of Africa, had salt. The more southern parts had gold, and they found a way to trade. Tea. I forgot about. No, I didn't forget about tea. The next slide is about tea. Actually, tea is coming. Tea is a newer commodity. at least from what I found, I'm not a historian, so if I'm saying this wrong, you can correct me. But I found that tree was traded later in the 9th century. Of course, it comes from China. And the interesting thing, I like this useless piece of trivia about trade, is that depending on how your country's traded with China, it influences how you call tea today. So in my language, in Czech, we say chai. I understand in Italian it's te. In English, of course, it's tea. In German, it's te. In Russian, it's also chai. You call it chai in Syria. Great. Is it correctly on the map? I hope so. The difference is that in Mandarin Chinese and in Cantonese Chinese, that's the Chinese in the south in Guangzhou, they call tea cha. But in the small pocket, if I put the cursor, I'm not sure if you can see it, maybe. In this small pocket in Fujian and in Taiwan, they call it te. So yes, it's also China in Kenya. Is it correctly on the map? They call it te. So if you traded with Fujian or Taiwan, your language calls it something like te. Interestingly, I had to look that up, why in Portuguese it's called cha. Portuguese traders were one of the first ones in these parts of the globe, and but they didn't trade with Fujian, but with Guangzhou, where in Cantonese Chinese it's also called cha. So this little pocket in Europe, in Western Europe, is allegedly because they traded with the Fujian part of China. Then we had whiskey from Ireland and Scotland. I hear now Scotch whiskey is a lot more popular than Irish, but I don't know. That's what I read. Oranges, that was actually a surprise to me. I did not know that. They come from the foothills of the Himalayas, so not from Spain, not from Florida. And they were brought by sailors, not only as a valuable good to trade, but also it helped the sailors themselves to protect against scurvy. So they also planted orange trees along their trade routes. So I have one more slide of the world trade history. Coffee is an interesting thing to this day because coffee only likes to grow in this narrow band of the world that's called the coffee belt. It's between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Coffee is very peculiar because it needs altitudes between 800 and 2000 meters, humidity between 60 and 80%, temperatures between 18 and 22 for Arabica, and 22 and 26 centigrades, of course, for Robusta. So you cannot really grow coffee in a lot of in Europe or in the United States. So we need international trade at least so that we can get coffee, because as you can see on the map that is the lower map, that's coffee consumption. And I think with the so the more yellow or red, the more coffee the country drinks. So with the exception of Brazil, coffee is drunk in the countries where it cannot grow. So the case for trade here is obvious. There are countries that can grow coffee, but they don't drink it. We drink it and we cannot grow it. So there's obvious potential here, and obviously all people are better off if the commodity is traded. I don't want to dwell too long on this, but we should say, we shouldn't stay silent on it. Not all trade is always good. I think you're a bunch of libertarians, so I don't need to say what the textbooks always say, that there's trade in drugs, and that is bad. There is trade in drugs, but maybe it's actually good. But of course, we can say and must say that the trade in slaves was bad, but it was a very profitable trade back in the day. And in cases of some modern slavery, it still exists. So not all trade, not all international trade is good, and we should be upfront about it. So now, after 20 minutes, we finally got to the protectionism part. We established why people trade. Somebody somewhere very distantly has something that you want, be it wine 6,000 or 8,000 years ago, be it coffee today. It's something that you like, but you cannot get. So that's why you have to trade it. Is there a difference between national trade and international trade? For economists, not really. It doesn't matter if you buy something from your local Tesco or from Alibaba. It's the same. It's somebody has something that you want, you pay them for it, and they'll give it to you. The problem, of course, is for politicians. So that's why we recognize international trade as a thing at all. So we have some stupid ideas, or we've had some stupid ideas about trade. I split them into 3 categories, but they overlap. So it's not very clearly divided what is what. The first thing I have is mercantilism. Then I have unequal treaties and modern protectionism. Mercantilism, in short, is that you think imports are bad and exports are good. So you only want to export and gather money or gold, as was back in the day. Well, it doesn't work, because if you only collect the currency or the gold, you will have inflation or hyperinflation, and not the wealth that you wanted. People think economists cannot agree on anything, but economists actually agree that 93% of economists agree that tariffs are inefficient, as economists would say. I can say that economists agree the tariffs or import quotas are bad. These 5 points is from a larger blog post by Greg Mankiw, who is a economics professor at Harvard, and I think it's an old blog post by now. It's now maybe 15 years old, maybe older. But there are other studies, other polls among economists that they come to the same conclusion. Professional economists, if you ask economists in the academia, most of them will say that tariffs are a bad idea. Some economists leave their departments in schools, in universities, and go into politics, and then they change the tune. But when they're working as economists, they agree that international trade should be tariff-free and quota-free. This is a poster from the United Kingdom. I think around I don't know. I wanted to say 100 years old, but I'm not sure actually. I really like this poster, so you can take that as an intermission. There's nothing accompanying the poster. Just look at it. I like how it's presented. And the Liberal Party in the United Kingdom had a bunch of posters saying, free trade is good. Vote for us liberals. We'll protect the free trade. To emphasize the point about economists agreeing on trade, this is a great article by Paul Krugman, who is nobody's idea of a libertarian. But in 1997, he wrote an article called In Praise of Cheap Labor, saying, well, to put it very shortly, we need to trade with the poorer countries where the labor is cheaper so that we can realize the comparative advantages. They can produce some things cheaper than us, and we can produce some things cheaper than them. Cheap labor is a relative term. For example, Germany can produce cars very cheaply, much more cheaper than, or very advanced cars, much more cheaper than some countries. So the potential for trade is always there, and we normally associate cheap labor with sweatshops and t-shirts, but if we look at it from the comparative advantage point of view, we produce the other goods or services cheaply also. I recommend to everybody to read this article. I translated it into Czech, but there are not very many Czech attendees here. I don't see, maybe not one. So no need for you to read my Czech translation if you can read the English original. If you ask this question, if whether poor countries and rich countries can trade together, if you ask this question to some people, they will say, no, the poor countries have nothing to offer, and the vicious, what is it called, vicious circle of poverty doesn't allow them to trade with us, which is incorrect. The only things that prohibit some people in some countries from trading with people in other countries are political barriers. Sometimes, of course, also geographical and stuff. But always there's agriculture, there's some labor for footwear, for example, or for clothes that we can employ even in very poor countries for the goods that we want to buy. And if there's nothing else, they can migrate to the richer countries, or they could if they weren't politically prohibited. So in economics, we call it comparative advantage. It was discovered by David Ricardo. How long ago? 200 years ago now, maybe even more. Let's say 200 years ago. Then it was refined. There are mathematical proofs. We also know there are empirical proofs of it, because we trade with a lot of richer people in a lot of rich countries and people in a lot of poor countries too. So we know this works. And when it doesn't work, that's because of tariffs, quotas, or the so-called non-tariff barriers. I will get to it maybe on the next slide even. No, not on the next slide yet. So, history of tariffs. When I did this presentation until very recent, when I used to do it until very recently, or the predecessor to this presentation, I always said, well, the history of tariffs is very simple. They used to be high, but now they are low. It kind of is still true, but not fully. So if we look at the tariffs that the United States imposed on imported goods in history, the chart starts in the year 1820 and ends in 2016. We can see how previously the tariffs were high. So in the 1820s, the average tariff rate was, what is it, like 45%. And in 2016, it was about 2 or 3%. It depends on how you calculate it. The the trend was downward sloping. I think that's very readily visible, but there are some exceptions. The most famous of them is the Smoot-Hawley tariff of the 1930s, which spiked the tariffs on some imports very high, but not all imports were affected. So the average tariff rate didn't jump high as much, but it still was a economic nightmare. And it's still in the textbooks until today. And the new Trump tariffs are very often compared to the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. So it was a blunder, and it was then very quickly the Smoot-Hawley tariff was very quickly abolished. Yeah, Zainab says sometimes it's cheaper to import something than to make it. Yeah, some people say we have two ways of producing something. We can either produce it in a factory, or we can produce something else that we know how to produce and then buy the car, for example, from somebody who knows how to make it more efficiently. That's the basis of trade. I don't produce cars. I don't produce really anything. What I do is talk about economics. Some people sometimes pay me for that, and then I can buy the car or an apple. I don't know how to grow an apple, but so for me it would be very difficult to grow an apple because I don't know how to do it. I know how to sell economics to people, which allows me to produce an apple. That's a very good point, which I should have said, but forgot. That was the case not only in the US that the tariffs used to be high and then got lower. It was the case in France, in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a little strange because it used to have very low tariffs, but then it switched to the policy of imperial preference. So imports from the British Commonwealth were without tariffs, but everybody else had to, the importers from everywhere else had to pay some tariff. But generally, the story holds. In the 19th century, the tariffs were high, but then the politicians, the economists, convinced the politicians or the voters that tariffs are bad. I'm not sure about the voters. Voters love tariffs. So let's say economists convinced the politicians that tariffs are bad, and they went down. I have here a chart of many countries. I'm not sure how many. Somebody can calculate. Somebody can count them. And the comparison is between the tariffs in 1947 and 2011. In all of the countries except Japan, the new tariffs are lower, usually a lot lower than what is it, 50, 60-ish years ago. So that's the story. That's what I've always been telling people, that it took hundreds of years to convince the politicians that tariffs are bad, but slowly they began to listen. And we moved basically to a post-tariff world where, for example, the European Union, the average tariff was around 1 or 2%, depends on how you calculate it. The average tariff in the United States, again, was around 2%. Also depends on how you calculate it. Some people say the EU tariff was higher. Some people say the US tariff was higher. Doesn't matter. It was more or less the same. But then something bad happened. People elected Donald Trump president for the second term. And he has an understanding of international trade like people in like the 15th century, or I don't know. He has economists around him, but some of them are cooks, but some of them are very kooky, but some of them are normal economists who must know that whatever he's doing on trade is terrible, but they chose for some reason to go along with it. And so now we have a reversal of the general story that I used to tell. This chart is from Joey Politano. I really recommend following him on Twitter or on Blue Sky. He produces some very interesting charts about the US economy. And these are his calculations about the tariffs. One thing is that it's difficult to produce these charts because they change every day, basically. Although I think I don't think I've heard a new tariff announcement today, but I think there was at least one yesterday. So not every day, but most days there's a new tariff or a suspension of a tariff. But this chart was produced in June, I think. And at that time, the average US tariff was calculated at around, let's say, 17%, a lot higher than what it was until Trump took office, which was around 2.5%, if I'm reading this chart correctly. It is terrible. It's damaging to the US economy. It's damaging to the world economy. It's, I think, illegal under United States law, and it's definitely illegal under the law of the World Trade Organization, but we'll come back to that later. There's another chart saying the same story. The external tariff of the United States kept going down with some kinks until Trump took office for the first time, and he hiked the tariffs for China, the European Union, and maybe some other places too. I'm not sure, but definitely these were the big ones: China and the EU. Then the Biden administration got rid of the EU tariffs, but they kept the Chinese tariffs and introduced tariffs on Canadian timber. Very bad policy. It worsened the inflation that maybe lost Democrats the election. Totally wrong from the economic point of view. I'm not a politician, so I don't know if that was wise politically or not. It was terrible economics, but that was still the good old days compared to what we have now. The orange line is calculated in April 2025. Then Trump rescinded some of the tariffs, at least, or paused them. So it went from 25% here to like, what is it, 17, 18-ish. I'm not actually sure what it's now, what the projections are. We'll know at the end of the year what the average tariff for 2025 was. But it's a mess. Some tariffs only existed for a couple of hours, which might actually be the world record. Probably is. Who's so crazy to change a tariff schedule twice in a day, except for Donald Trump? Now, Trump says that he has to do that because tariffs are not the only thing that exists, like the explicit tariffs, but there are also non-tariff measures. These are the three charts, maybe kind of difficult to understand at first, but they say the same story. Non-tariff measures like hygienic standards, what your goods must comply with, what certifications they must have, how they are stored, and all other things like that. The number of these measures is growing. So the chart, this one on the left, is, I think, very instructive. This is done by Australian agricultural exporters who are complaining how much these barriers are growing. The chart is 13 years, if I'm seeing correctly, and the non-tariff measures, that means measures that you will not find a number for. So it's not like you pay 5% of the cost of the fish, but you have to ensure that the fish is according to, for example, the EU standards. The number of these measures has gone up. But the way to deal with that is not by imposing additional tariffs, but to negotiate it in the World Trade Organization or bilaterally. So if the US is unhappy about their exporters facing difficulties exporting to the European Union, for example, there are ways to deal with that. I will have that later. Another thing that Trump complains about is how international trade decimated American manufacturing. If we look at the relative share of manufacturing in the economy, in the gross domestic product, we see everywhere in the Western world, in the what we used to call the Western world, we see everywhere that the relative share of manufacturing is dropping. That tells us nothing about the absolute numbers of workers. The United States is a country that continues to attract a lot of workers. So I'm not sure if in absolute terms there are actually fewer manufacturing jobs than in 1980s. Maybe not. But it's not only the US that where manufacturing as a share of GDP has gone down. It's the story of the countries getting richer. Fewer people work in manufacturing, more people work in services. It happens everywhere in every country that gets richer. There's nothing to complain about, and it's disingenuous to say it's disingenuous and outright dangerous to say that we have to rectify this by imposing high tariffs. The fact that protectionism doesn't work is visible from space. Now it sounds ridiculous, but when the Koreas split, there were economists who predicted that North Korea would be the richer one, would be the one growing faster, because it had the autarky, because it didn't trade with the world. We now, of course, look at these projections and we laugh, but because the only one who can afford to have light at night is the North Korean president, who plays on Steam. But that was what people thought. A lot of economists thought that the Soviet Union would grow faster than the United States, which again is super ridiculous to anybody who read a book about how it's or articles about the Soviet economy, or who visited it, or who had the unfortunate luck of living there. But these economists existed. But as I said at the beginning, not many of them exist now. So now the empirics have convinced a lot of them that trade and openness is actually good. This is a chart of the same story, how richer South Korea has gotten compared to North Korea over the course of these 60 years. So North Korea has probably even gotten poorer, at least at points, but South Korea is one of the richest and most developed countries in the world, and the experiment here, the natural experiment of which economy would do better, has been resolved very straightforward, in a straightforward manner. If that wasn't enough, we have another natural experiment of East and West Germany, where West Germany grew at about the same rate as as any other Western European country, maybe even maybe even faster. And East German economy slacked and was not performing. It improved only in the 1990s, when it finally was not communist and when it finally was allowed to pursue free enterprise and free trade. We could find many other many other stories like this in the world. The story of Hong Kong and China, for example, or what our think tank participates in, what we call that the economic freedom of the world. You can download the data, which is available from the 1990s for all the countries, for some countries even from the 1960s, and you can compare how free economically these countries are, and you can plot charts and see that the freer countries experience better economic growth. And you can plot other charts with other variables, like how rich are the poorest people in these countries. All these charts say the same story. The freer the economy, the better the people in the country or in the economy are. The better off the people in the economy are. Trump's idea, like I said, is very stupid. He thinks that if he buys something from China or the European Union that costs $100, he thinks he lost $100. Somebody should ask him if he thinks that the guests who stay at a Trump hotel, if he thinks that they're losing out on this trade with the hotel, because they give him money, he provides them services. So in his view, his guests are losing money. So, but I wonder why nobody has ever asked him that, or I at least have not seen that question asked of him. I lost the Zoom now. One thing that I would love for you to remember from this presentation is that export is a cost. We export as a means to be able to get what we want, which is the imports. If you go to your job, you're exporting your services, but you don't want to do that. That is the cost that you undergo in order to get money. So then you have the money, and then when you go to a Tesco, you exchange that money. So in short, you exchange your services to your employer for whatever you buy from the Tesco: bread, whiskey, wine, Georgian wine, anything. You don't want to do the export. If you could get it from the Tesco for free, you would do it. The export to you is a cost. So if there's one thing out of this presentation that I would love for you to remember, it's this: not that exports, all politicians will tell you exports are great. No, the export is a cost. Yes, it's great that we can do it so that we can buy the imports, but it is a cost to us to do the exporting. If we look at simplified balance of payments, so balance of payments is you have an accounting balance. You do it for companies. Your accountant in your company has to produce it for your company. We can do it for a country's economy as well. And this balance is always balanced out. It's always in balance. That's why it's called a balance. It cannot be in deficit. When people say that, they actually mean the deficit of the current account, which is the trade in goods. But the balance as a whole must be balanced. So generally, if you have a current account deficit, that means you are importing more stuff than you are exporting. That means it's balanced out on the financial account. That means in the, for example, of the United States, they import more stuff than they export, but they have foreign investors investing in the United States. So, for example, the Japanese people who are saving a lot as a share, they are saving more as a share of their income than Americans. Then they have surplus savings, and they can invest these savings in America. They can do it directly or through companies. A Japanese company might collect the savings of Japanese through bonds or stock and invest in the United States. As you will see on the next, my country, the Czech Republic, is actually the opposite. We have a current account surplus, and we've had it for 20 years, I think, maybe more by now. And we also have a financial account deficit. So that means we invest in foreign countries more than they invest in our country. I hope I haven't. Yeah, that's right. This is not something economists. This is not a fairy tale. This is, you can see this in the data. You see that basically these two lines are mirrors of each other. The current account surplus, that is the imports, that is the exports minus imports. That's the line below for America. That's the light blue line, is almost perfectly mirrored by the capital account surpluses, or surpluses. So it's kind of incredible to me that they are mirrored so perfectly, because in theory you can balance the accounts in other things as well, like central bank reserves, but these are incredibly mirrored lines. The history of the current account and of the capital account for the United States, it's a perfect image. Also on this chart that I took from a Cato Institute study that is called, what is it called? The Updated Case for Free Trade. It shows us that as imports grow, GDP of the United States grows as well. So it's not the case that with more imports, the United States is getting poorer. It's almost embarrassing, I think, to present this chart, because nobody, maybe except for Donald Trump, nobody thinks that the United States is actually getting poorer. Maybe now, but not historically, not in the last 30 years. And this is, I think, from the same study, from another study by Cato, although the ultimate source is something else. Where is an iPhone produced? The answer is everywhere. It's a global product that the world has to come together to produce it. Many parts of this world contribute to a making of an iPhone. There's an old story called iPencil, which I recommend again also to everybody to read, and it's by Leonard Reed. And it tells the story of how nobody can produce a simple pencil. It's the ingredients that go into producing a pencil are so varied from all of these countries across the globe. The essay was written, I think, in the 1950s. So even back then, even such a simple thing as a pencil was too difficult to produce, or too expensive to produce locally. And what applies to a pencil applies multiple times for advanced products like an iPhone. And people say, well, the iPhone is produced in China. Well, it is completed in China, or it is screwed together in China, maybe. But that's not the most valuable part of the iPhone. The most valuable parts are actually done in the United States. The software and the design and the thinking behind an iPhone is mostly done in the Western countries, and the plurality of it is done in the United States. So yes, it is finally assembled somewhere in China, but that's not the total production of an iPhone. And this is who captures the cost of an iPhone. Apple, an American company, captures again a plurality of the price. Even if you're a country that cannot produce anything basically locally, if you're living on a piece of rock like Singapore, you can still get richer. You can get so rich that you're richer than your former colonizer, the United Kingdom. Similar thing applies to Hong Kong, but you can grow something in Hong Kong, but Singapore, I think, is very illuminating in this regard, because it's very difficult to produce anything in agriculturally, at least in Singapore. But Singapore and Hong Kong are the two jurisdictions or countries that for a very long time had zero tariffs. They had some like specific tariffs for some specific items, but the average tariff rate for in Singapore and in Hong Kong was 0.0 or 0.1% or something like this. There was no general tariff, so you could import anything. Did it affect negatively their growth? Well, you can't say it from this chart, but you would have a very hard case to argue to say, well, if Singapore actually had a 20% tariff or 50% or whatever Donald Trump wants to impose, they would be even richer today. But just by looking at this chart, maybe, but it contradicts everything we know about economics. Another thing which I very much recommend for you to read is an essay by a 19th century French economist, Frédéric Bastiat. It's normally called the Candlemakers Petition, or the Petition of Candlemakers. The official title in English is actually a petition of the manufacturers of candles, wax lights, lamps, candle lights, street lamps, snuffers, extinguishers, and the producers of oil, tallow, resin, alcohol, and generally of everything connected with lighting. And it's a genius essay. It's so very well written, because Bastiat basically says, well, English economy is unfairly advantaged against the French economy, because in France we have a lot of sunlight, but the Brits, they have this fog and rain, and they don't have the sunlight. So the producers of candles in England are better off, because people in England want to buy more candles. So he structures this essay. It really reads like a petition of French candle makers. They're saying these candle makers are applying are pleading with the government, saying, well, you should do something about it. You should mandate that everybody has to have the blinds on their windows, so that we can be competitive against the English candle makers, because they have the fog and rain, so people want to buy candles in England but not in France. And it raises a great question. If cheap imports are bad, how come imports that we get for free, like the sunlight, are not bad? If it were true that a cheap import was bad, then it must be doubly true for something that is free. It's a great essay. It's only like 4 pages, but it's very persuasive. And I've met many people who told me that this essay changed their life, or at least their economic thinking. So very much recommended. This is what Trump said about. I think he actually didn't say it like this. It's paraphrased about the North American Free Trade Agreement, which he then well, not him, but his negotiators renegotiated to United States Mexico Canada agreement, which he also doesn't really seem to be bound by. But I maybe don't need to tell you that Trump's statement is incorrect, because the only thing again he looks at is the current account deficit. So how much how much more America has imported from Canada and Mexico, which is a big number, but it's totally irrelevant to anything. And it's made the lives of Americans who bought these goods a lot better. Which brings me to the WTO, to the World Trade Organization, and to the rules. I think it's important to cover that, even though I'm talking now for an hour already, but please bear with me. So the most basic World Trade Organization rule, I have a meme here from Severance. I don't know if anybody's seen it. So Apple produces these TV shows that are very expensive, very good, very expensive. The production has to cost incredible amounts of money, but nobody watches them. But Severance is one of my favorite TV shows. And I thought it was a funny meme, but nobody will get it because nobody has seen it. But according to the World Trade Organization rules, you have to treat all countries equally. So if you impose a tariff, you have to impose the same tariff on everybody. You cannot just choose that you will impose a 5% tariff on Canada, 7% on Japan, 15% on Georgia, 25% on Kenya. You cannot do that if you're a member of the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization, as you can see, has 166 members. For the European Union, each of the member countries is a member, and the European Union itself is also a member. The European Union has exclusive or almost exclusive competency over international trade for the European countries. So, for example, the tariffs are set by the European Union, not by the individual member states. So even the European Union is bound by the rules of the World Trade Organization. Right, and that applies not only to quotas, but to import quotas as well. So you cannot say we will allow like 20 sheep from America, but 1 million sheep from I don't know, Afghanistan. Cannot say that. You cannot do that. You might think that what Trump is doing is illegal under these rules, and you will be correct. The history of this rule that you have to treat everybody equally is called the most favored nation, MFN. You will find it in all WTO documents. MFN, MFN, MFN. It's the basis. It's basically why the WTO exists. It's the cornerstone of the World Trade Organization. How this rule came about. It started to appear in the 17th century. What I found that the first appearance was in the Treaty of Madrid in 1967, though it didn't get much respect, so it had to be reiterated in a subsequent treaty in the I think 1671 or 670-ish something. Spain gave England the same treatment that it gave the Dutch and the French. So in this treaty between England and Spain, it was first put into legal writing that whenever Spain gives a lower tariff to the Dutch or the French, it has to give the same lower tariff to the English. Jade Treaty in the and at the end of the 18th century, United States. I think I have it the other way around. It doesn't matter. The United States and Britain agreed on this principle that they are respectively the most favored nation, and so whenever US or Britain imposed a smaller, lower tariff on somebody, they had to do it for Britain or the US too. But the first modern free trade agreement, maybe you have heard about it at school, is the so-called Cobden-Chevalier Treaty. Cobden, I think, was a British member of parliament, and Chevalier, I think, was French finance minister or something. It's a trade agreement between France and England. They gave each other lowered for each other tariffs in what is it? Wine, brandy, and silk from France, and coal, iron, and industrial goods from Britain. And they agreed that for each other, they will be the most favored nation. So that, again, if France imposed the lower tariff for, let's say, coal on another country, they had to copy that for England. And if Britain imposed the lower tariff on wine for example, Spain, they had to copy this tariff for France. Then in 1882, we have a treaty between Korea, what was then called Joseon, and the United States. And then finally, after the Second World War, we have a proliferation of this rule that is very sensible and very good, and nobody disputed its sensibleness and goodness until very recently. There are of course other rules. Another very basic rule is a national treatment. So that means you cannot treat your domestic producers differently from foreign producers. There are various mechanisms how to ensure that is the case, because in a lot of cases that is not the case. But it should be the case. You shouldn't treat foreign producers on your domestic market differently than your domestic producers. The European Union, inside the European Union, tries to enforce this rule a lot, but the respect for this rule among the WTO members who don't have a treaty between themselves is not so big, unfortunately. But it's another WTO rule. I will skip this. There are exceptions, or there is one exception to the rule that you have to treat everybody equally, and that is if you have a free trade agreement. If you have a free trade agreement with a country or with a block of countries, you impose, the logic is, zero tariffs on them or very low tariffs on some things. You don't have to copy that to everybody. I'm not sure what the rationale between the exception is. Maybe it's to encourage countries to actually have zero tariffs, at least for some countries. But it exists. So for example, the European Union countries have a free trade agreement amongst themselves that is called the European Union or the European Economic Area. and so they have zero tariffs between themselves, but they have an external tariff for other countries. But for other countries, it applies equally, with the exception of countries with which the EU has a free trade agreement, like Mexico or Japan or now Mercosur. Then the EU has zero tariffs with these countries that have with whom it has a free trade agreement. But again, the rule applies to other countries. It has the same external tariff to other countries. There's another exception as well. I don't want to cover that. It's not important in the case of what I'm talking about, which is mostly Donald Trump's disrespect of the most favored nation rule. On this chart, there are various regional blocks of free trade. NAFTA is now called the United States, Mexico, Canada. I'm not sure it really exists anymore. And there are other regional blocks as well. And they, of course, sometimes overlap. Do I have the overlapping? No. The biggest free trade area in the world is the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreements for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, between Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, the United Kingdom, and Vietnam. As you saw here, a lot of these countries, or maybe all of them, are also members of some other free trade areas. So these free trade areas overlap. That's not a problem. It's a normal thing. And this free trade area not only is the biggest one, but also the interesting thing is that the United States were supposed to be part of it. Back then it was called just Trans-Pacific Partnership, but the first administration of Donald Trump withdrew from the negotiations, and so it's not part of it. The other countries negotiated it between themselves, and then the United Kingdom joined later. A similar thing happened with the TTIP, which was a proposed free trade deal between the EU and the United States. Again, the United States withdrew from the negotiations under the first government or under the first administration of Donald Trump. So when Trump is complaining about tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers between the United States and, for example, the European Union or Vietnam or Japan or Australia or Chile, he is the one to blame that these were not dealt with in the proposed trade agreements, because then in these trade agreements you hash them out. Libertarians often say that the best trade agreement is like zero pages or 1 page, which would be nice if it worked like that. But because of the non-tariff barriers and because of what's called rules of origin, where you have to specify where in this global chain the good is actually coming from, you cannot do it reasonably in 1 page. You could do a very bad free trade agreement on 1 page, but it wouldn't amount to much. So realistically, you need several hundred pages in a free trade agreement. Some free trade agreements are thousands of pages. Maybe that's a bit excessive, but that's the current reality. Cato Institute and some other think tanks did, I think it was like 10 think tanks, did a produced a model EU-US free trade agreement, which still got to, I think, like 300 pages. And they tried to be as short and as liberal in the meaning of classical liberalism, trade liberalism, as possible. It's still not 1 page. I will do this very quickly. Unequal treatment of countries is a thing of the past. It in China, historians call these unequal treaties. They were imposed in the 19th and 20th centuries on China, Japan, and Korea. The main culprit was the United Kingdom, but it was done by other countries like Russia, Japan, France, Portugal as well. They basically conquered China, Japan, and Korea, and the treaties were diktats where the Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans didn't have much of a choice, and it was very humiliating. The Chinese still remember that, and at least in China, it led to nationalism and then to communism. I think there's a quite visible through line between the unequal treaties and what then happened in these countries. So I think we should be very very wary of doing something like this again. It applies not only to the United States. The European Union also in some of the treaties tries to force the small countries to not very favorable conditions. Well, to end the tirade on most favored nation rule, I have this picture of Donald Trump totally and utterly disrespecting it. And if we have time, I will say one last thing. Who pays for the tariffs? It depends basically how much of a choice you have as a customer. If your demand is more elastic, as we call it in economics, that means when the consumer has a bigger choice, when he has more alternatives, then the tariffs is mostly paid by the producer. When the demand is less elastic, that means less of a choice, then the tariff is mostly paid by the consumer. Less elastic demand is, for example, on diamonds from Lesotho, as the Donald Trump, I don't have it on the right. No, I don't have Lesotho here, but he imposed tariffs on this country as well. Empirically, we have some preliminary estimates so far of the Trump tariffs and the pass through. What they say in economics, the pass through from the tariff to the consumer price is now estimated at 60 to 80% by the Budget Lab and by Goldman Sachs. So the customers in the US now pay most of the actual imposed tariff. That's all from me. It took me 80 minutes. Sorry about that. If you expected a shorter talk, that's all, folks. And if you'd like to support our humanitarian mission, go to this website, OP. It's in Czech. It's a word. It probably means nothing to you, but opkyselacz.cz, and you will see how you can support us. We are going to Ukraine again on Sunday. We will be delivering stuff from Czech mothers to Ukrainian mothers for their babies, and we will try to commemorate Rose Friedman and Aaron Director, who were also very big supporters of free trade, among other things, and who were born in a Ukrainian village. You can also support that if you have the resources to do so. Thank you very much for your attention, and I can answer questions.
Thank you, Martin. It was a pleasure. Also, I want to say to everyone that if you want more information about the think tank of Martin or whatever, just feel free to write to me, or also Martin, if I have time to respond to all of you. So just send me a message if you need any other information, guys. And what else? We are doing also a conference about Ukraine, so I just have the opportunity to talk about that just 30 seconds in Rome for the Holodomor in November, but I will keep you updated about this. So let's go to the question. It was amazing presentation. Everybody agrees that I receive a lot of questions that say that the presentation is really interesting. We will do very fast. So the first one is anonymous. No, it's not anonymous. It's from Matayo Bayaga. Thank you for the power presentation. My question is how nowadays the economics embargo deteriorates the principle of internal trade and the welfare national. I don't know if I read correctly, but yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, the question is the economics embargo deteriorates the principle of internal trade and the welfare national. That's how that's embargo ruin the internal trade of a nation.
Yeah, the embargo on Russia, or
Yes, I think it's a general question.
So we imposed the trade embargo, the European Union and the United States imposed an embargo on Russia after the invasion, and I actually don't know empirically what it did to the Russian economy. We know that McDonald's and stuff and other companies moved out, but how much a Russian consumer can feel the embargo in higher prices or in worse quality, I don't know. It's a good question. I have not read any empirical studies about it. I'm not sure many economists go to Russia now to do empirical work. But I will try to look something up. Honestly, I don't know. I think there are trade embargoes also on from the United States on Cuba and Venezuela, maybe. Also cannot say how much that affected the population in those countries. Probably not for good. That's the theory, but I don't know any empirics, sadly.
Yeah, that's perfect. So for other question, I think you already respond to this in during the live, so I will be really quick. Frederick asked if about WTO. What's your view on China joining the WTO, particularly regarding the criticism of unfair trade practice, etc., and their destruction of companies under country? So I think you already respond of this, but if you want to elaborate more.
China joined the WTO and I think in the late 1990s, or was it 1995? I'm not sure. Well, what it did was it constrained China that it couldn't discriminate among the members of the WTO, which is basically everybody or all the normal countries. It also meant that we couldn't discriminate against China. So there's two sides of it immediately. So this is, I think it's good that China cannot discriminate and that we cannot discriminate against China. I think is good. Unfair trade practices. China gets the blame for manipulating the currency and stuff. But in the long run, I don't think you can manipulate the currency to your benefits. I don't believe, from my master's in economics, I don't believe you can manipulate the currency long term to advantage yourself, to give yourself an advantage on trade. Maybe that's what your accountants will say, but to me it's impossible to do this, and you will only cause a higher inflation and more volatile inflation. But the real economy, to me, cannot be affected by a nominal thing like the exchange rate. Then people say China uses slave labor, for example, in Xinjiang or something. That is a valid concern, and they shouldn't do it. I don't know if we have mechanisms to deal with that. But if it's a real unfair trade practice, the WTO rules allow you to rectify that. You shouldn't do it generally. You shouldn't raise the tariff on everything. You should deal with a specific good or a specific commodity where this is occurring. What do people? The fact that China has or used to have very, very cheap labor is not an unfair trade practice. That is what we want. And another thing people say is pollution. That is more difficult, I think. We will not solve this here. The answer of the EU is the what's it called? CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism, so that the importers from China and other countries will have to pay basically for the pollution. Anyway, I'm not sure that that is good, but it's one of the ways to deal with that. And I think that is WTO compliant. There are many things levied against China. I'm not sure how they stand up to scrutiny. And if we look at China, at least until about 2013, when it seemed to be liberalizing and seemed to be kind of progressive ish, I think it worked. Chinese, hundreds of millions of Chinese got out of poverty. We got Chinese goods, so we could focus on producing other goods, and I think it was a good deal for most people. Of course, it was bad if you were competing against these Chinese goods in the EU or in the US. That was bad for you, but that's the normal course of any international trade or any trade at all. If there's somebody who can produce something more cheaper than you, more cheaply than you, then that's how it works. I know it's unpleasant for the person, for the company that deals with that, but that's the normal course of progress. So until then, I think overwhelmingly that was good that China was part of the international economy. It gets worse and worse basically by the year when they are trying to silence athletes, students in universities, now supporting Russia. So now the calculus is different, but it used to. A lot of people, including me, used to say we shouldn't politicize trade. Trade is one thing. We should trade goods and services and deal with the politics separately. I fear that they are getting more and more entangled, and that it's more difficult to separate the two. And China is the number one example of it. And now, unfortunately, the United States, where they impose their policies on basic trade. So now I would still say it's good that China is a member of the WTO, but it's less clear to me now than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Thank you, Martin. So for today's all, I will order some Georgian wine after this presentation because we talk so much about it that I want to try so bad. And thank you again for everything, for your time here and your knowledge. Everybody appreciate so much. So we will see.